Have you ever been with friends and heard one of them refer to someone as filthy rich? Maybe some of us have used that phrase, filthy rich. But what does our friend mean by that phrase? Taken literally, you would think they were referring to someone who became rich through some illicit activity, like the head of a drug cartel or the leader of a child prostitution ring. However, in my experience, that's not the context of such comments. Usually, my friends are referring to someone involved in a legitimate business activity. So why do they qualify their status of accumulating significant wealth as filthy? I suppose they mean that the person has made more money than they should have, that their wealth is somehow too much, and therefore ethically questionable, or worse, not spiritual. But often, I detect in the tone of such words as filthy rich feelings of envy and jealousy. When I observe myself and my society and the Western world as a whole, it's rather obvious that we live in a state of confusion, even conflict, when it comes to wealth. We all want more of it in our life, yet we don't feel quite right about the morality of accumulating and possessing money. This inner and outer conflict is illustrated clearly in my own biography. When I was a teenager, I went on 2 summer-long mission trips. The first to a small coastal fishing town in Mexico. My original motive for such trips, I admit, wasn't altruistic. I wanted an adventure, and going to remote areas of foreign countries sounded exciting. But I was also doing spiritual work. I put that phrase in quotes, by the way. Spending long hours in the intense heat and humidity, constructing a home for a minister and his family. Wasn't I virtuous? Hurricane Hugo busted through the town the following year, and I learned that the home our team had built had served as a shelter for many in the town. Oh, did that make me feel good about my sacrificial service, again in quotes. I did the same thing the following year, constructing a home for a headmaster of a boarding school in a remote area of Liberia, Africa, which you see here. On these mission trips, I could only bring 32 pounds of belongings with me, which meant 3 sets of clothes, a 2.5-gallon bucket to bathe and do laundry out of, a sleeping bag, soap, bug spray, and sunscreen. That was about it. All my possessions for the summer. Despite having little, I had never been happier in my life. I realized through those experiences that spending long hours with the purpose of simply making money so that I could have a nice home with nice furniture, etc., was not going to fulfill me. Only living for ideals and serving others brought me satisfaction. I was performing sacred work, again in quotes. All other work was somehow profane. The strength of this conviction expressed itself in my response to a conversation I had with a couple who, upon my return from my second mission trip, took my mom and me to an expensive restaurant for dinner, the sort of place where you ought not enter without wearing a tie. At one point during the meal, the wife asked me, "What sort of job do you want to have after college?" With no hesitation, I declared, "I want to be a missionary." Her jaw dropped open, and she said, "A missionary? You can't make any money being a missionary. Don't you know money makes the world go round?" After my deeply satisfying experiences living a very Spartan life, I felt the significant activities of life required little to no money. And I left that evening feeling pretty self-righteous about the subject. I wasn't aware yet that I was suffering from a confusion caused by a very limited perspective. Though I personally was content with little immaterial goods, my service work and the supplies needed to fulfill it, our food, the wood, cinder blocks, and cement for the construction project, all my travel expenses, All of these things were made possible by other people's wealth. My supposed sacred work was only made possible by others' profane work. Quotes around those two words as well. This is an image of a teaching moment in the life of the man from Galilee, Jesus. For those of you listening who don't identify yourself as religious, please open your minds to the meaning of such art. For if you grew up in Western culture, the teaching expressed in such works, whether you accept or not the religion from which it came, has profoundly shaped your own understanding of the role of money and wealth in your life. Such imagery and religious stories have shaped all of us, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. Now, Rubens' painting shows religious leaders trying to trap Jesus with a trick question about the Jewish obligations to the Roman political and economic establishment and their obligations to their religion. The question was designed so that either of the two answers Jesus could offer would get him in trouble. And the painting captures the moment when Jesus tells his questioners to, quote, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Here is the situation as described in the Christian gospel according to Mark. The chief priests and the scribes and the elders sent to Jesus some Pharisees and some Herodians to catch him out in what he said. These came and said to him, "Master, we know you are an honest man, that you are not afraid of anyone, because a man's rank means nothing to you, and that you teach the way of God in all honesty. Is it permissible to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay, yes or no?" Seeing through their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why do you set this trap for me? Hand me a denarius and let me see it." They handed him one, and he said, "Whose head is this? Whose name?" "Caesar's," they told him. Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God." This reply took them completely by surprise. Well, on a literal reading of the passage, this is about whether a good Jew should pay taxes to Rome. And if Jesus says yes, then he is betraying his own people and religion. If he says no, then he is a traitor to Rome and liable to arrest. This is the trap the questioner has set for him. Jesus' ambiguous answer avoids the trap, and it may at minimum teach us that we should pay our taxes. But such an interpretation doesn't clearly resolve our own issues about money. And make no mistake, this passage is meant to address our relationship to money and the world where it plays such a vital role. So there are many other levels of interpretation of this passage. The teaching, if we step back from all the various possible meanings, considers a fundamental question for those of us trying to live a purposeful life, a life that benefits others, a spiritual life, if I may put it that way. All doing this while meeting the obligations we have to this material reality, including the need to make a living, pay taxes, support a family, be a responsible citizen, etc. The teaching raises the issue of our relationship to the demands of the external world, which is Caesar's domain, and the inner or spiritual life that we can call God's domain. How do we properly navigate these obligations, particularly those moments when they seem in conflict? My mission trips were made possible by people who had spent considerable time giving to Caesar what was Caesar's, so that they could give to God what was God's, so that they would have the means to serve others with their money. Here's another artistic depiction of this passage of scripture by the Dutch master Jacob Bakker. I'm not going to even attempt to try to pronounce his middle name. Bakker has made sure we recognize that Jesus touches the coin. Money is not ritually unclean or evil. Otherwise, he could not have touched it. His right index finger rests on the coin while his left index finger points upward to indicate heaven or the spiritual realm, the realm of the sacred. For me, this painting makes clear that money and working for it is not morally suspect. Instead, the image places a clear emphasis on the right use of money or wealth. That wealth, regardless of the size of it, becomes noble when it is put in service of higher things. And what are higher things? Well, that's really up to the individual's own conscience, isn't it? If you have or could have great wealth, how would you use it? What are the higher things as you define them? Let's explore other traditions teaching on the subject of money, wealth, and its proper role in our life. A man asked Gautama Buddha, "I want happiness." Buddha said, "First remove I, that's ego. Then remove want, that's desire. See, now you are left with only happiness." The Buddhist teachings on our topic could be summarized, I think, as detachment and right livelihood. And the following passage from a Buddhist text illustrates the idea of wealth rightly made and used. It starts, "There are these 5 benefits that can be obtained from wealth. There is the case where the disciple of the noble ones, using the wealth earned through his efforts and enterprise, amassed through the strength of his arm and piled up through the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, provides himself with pleasure and satisfaction, and maintains that pleasure rightly. He provides his mother and father with pleasure and satisfaction, and maintains that pleasure rightly. He provides his children, his wife, his slaves, servants, and assistants with pleasure and satisfaction, and maintains that pleasure rightly. This is the first benefit that can be obtained from wealth. Furthermore, the disciple of the noble ones, using the wealth earned through his efforts and enterprise, amassed through the strength of his arm and piled up through the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, provides his friends and associates with pleasure and satisfaction, and maintains that pleasure rightly. This is the second benefit that can be obtained from wealth. Furthermore, the disciple of the noble ones, using the wealth earned through his efforts and enterprise, amassed through the strength of his arm and piled up through the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, wards off calamities coming from fire, flood, kings, thieves, or hateful heirs, and keeps himself safe. This is the third benefit that can be obtained from wealth. Furthermore, the disciple of the noble ones, using the wealth earned through his efforts and enterprise, amassed through the strength of his arm and piled up through the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, performs the 5 oblations to relatives, guests, the dead, kings, and devas. This is, you could summarize as spiritual moral obligations we have to the outer world. This is the 4th benefit that can be obtained from wealth. Furthermore, the disciple of the noble ones, using the wealth earned through his efforts and enterprise, amassed the strength of his arm and piled up through the sweat of his brow, righteous wealth righteously gained, institutes offerings of supreme aim, heavenly, resulting in happiness, leading to heaven, given to Brahmins and contemplatives who abstain from intoxication and heedlessness, who endure all things with patience and humility, each taming himself, each restraining himself, each taking himself to unbinding. This is the 5th benefit that can be obtained from wealth. If it so happens that when a disciple of the noble ones obtains these 5 benefits from wealth, his wealth goes to depletion, the thought occurs to him, "Even though my wealth has gone to depletion, I have obtained the 5 benefits that can be obtained from wealth," and he feels no remorse. If it so happens that when a disciple of the noble ones obtains these 5 benefits from wealth, his wealth increases. The thought occurs to him, "I have obtained the 5 benefits that can be obtained from wealth, and my wealth has increased," and he feels no remorse. So he feels no remorse in either case. I liken the doctrine of detachment from and right use of money as akin to drinking. If you can drink in moderation, never controlled by drink, never experiencing the phenomenon of craving, then go ahead and drink. Some people can obtain and use wealth like the moderate drinker, whose heart is gladdened by it, but never controlled by it, who never experiences craving, is never led to lie or abuse others because of it. If you are such a person, then I say enjoy your wealth and by all means acquire more of it, for there is so much good that could be done with it. Many wealthy individuals treat the making of money as a game. That's actually not too far off from detachment. If money is a game, there is more of an attitude of play and less of stress and anxiety and clinging. No one plays games out of a spirit of lack or anxiety. They play for fun. They might be disappointed if they lose, but that usually prompts them to immediately play again, always with the goal of enjoying the experience. Now, I admit this usually means winning, but we all know there is still joy in simply playing. Since classical Western philosophy has had a major impact on our ideas and culture, let's examine briefly its attitudes about wealth. Now, Aristotle, I think all of you have heard of him, condemned, quote, the piling up of superfluous fortunes, unquote. The piling up of superfluous fortunes. So Aristotle may have thought such excess made a person filthy rich. Frankly, the ancient Greeks distrusted wealth. At least wealth that was not used to free oneself from manual work so that one could pursue the finer things, like the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Here are a few more statements about work and wealth. Beware the barrenness of a busy life, said Socrates. The greatest wealth is to live content with little, according to Plato. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants, taught Epictetus. Now, these great philosophers, revered during antiquity and revered in modern times, may have preached caution in regards to accumulating wealth, but I must make clear that many of them were itinerant teachers, relying on the excess wealth of their students for a livelihood. So they may appear rather hypocritical. That conclusion is hard to escape, like in the case of Aristotle. But for other philosophers, their instruction is not anti-wealth so much as, like the Buddha's teaching, anti-attachment to wealth. Not becoming a slave to money, but instead using money to gift us with freedom to pursue some noble purpose, like learning and teaching philosophy. I believe many classical philosophers would agree with the French proverb, and it's sometimes attributed to Francis Bacon: money is a good servant, but a poor master. Let's admit that in almost every great philosophical and spiritual tradition, there is ambiguity about the ethical nature of money. Describing the ancient Romans, historian Will Durant said, quote, nearly everybody in Rome worshiped money with mad pursuit, and all but the bankers denounced it. So those of us who suffer with internal conflict around wealth are certainly not alone. The conflict is universal. Friends, here's one of my favorite paintings on the subject, and according to most art historians, the first artistic depiction of this biblical event. It is by the great Venetian Renaissance painter Tiziano Boccelli, known simply to us as Titian. The first thing I notice when compared to Rubens and Backer's versions is that there are only two figures in the work, and they are so close that they're touching one another. It is a very intimate scene. Unlike in the other two paintings, Jesus does not actually touch the coin. However, he reaches for the money, the symbol of Caesar's realm, the symbol of earthly obligations and engagement. So there is a vital action toward the morally ambiguous realm of Caesar. Again, a clear indication that involvement in the world to obtain wealth is not an evil in and of itself. Now contrast the hand of Jesus with the hand of the questioner. The hand on the right is dark, probably from the sun, muscular and grizzled, with the telltale signs of a laborer's hands. It is the color of the soil. It's as if Titian is saying this money has been earned through hard labor. It is given to the holy man, whose luminous hand reaches out for it. This action of exchange holds the promise that the moment noble use is made of the coin, it will become sacred. This work also has the distinction of being the first of Titian's works that he signed. Look at the left side of the collar of the one questioning Jesus. It's hard to make the writing out, I know, but it spells out Titian's name. Most scholars believe that by signing his name on the clothing of the one asking the question, the artist is identifying with the questioner. Titian recognizes the inner conflict within himself. He is seeking wisdom on the subject by painting this painting. We could also interpret this literally in the sense, as an artist, he has to ask his patrons for money, and it's not always a comfortable position to be in. Look here, I've created the sacred work of art. Should I not receive my just wages for it? So this painting appears to me quite autobiographical. There's one final part of this painting I want to point out. The expressions on the faces of the two men. The face of the questioner, even though it's in profile, I don't see it as one of mockery or trickery. It doesn't seem to me treacherous in nature, but appears to be a face of earnestness and sincerity. And the face of the teacher from Galilee. Even though in the scriptural passage the painting is based on, Jesus clearly seems put out that his questioner is trying to trick him. In this painting, Jesus seems to care for the questioner, seems to recognize the weight of the inner conflict in the man. The teacher, the man of pure spirit, almost seems to say, don't worry about your obligations to Caesar, the need to make money in a world that may challenge your values and ideals, that may require your hands and perhaps your soul to get a little dirty. What you have justly earned, I will make holy. What you may believe profane, I will make sacred. Well, friends, my hope in this initial presentation on the spirit of wealth is to help us recognize any inner conflicts we may have around money and the accumulation of wealth. And I'd like us to examine our own hearts and minds, to ask ourselves, do I possess false beliefs about wealth and the work necessary for its accumulation? Have I attached negative emotions and attitudes to an activity which is so necessary for expanding good in the world? And one final question. What use have I put my money to? Have I used it to create greater meaning in my life, to expand meaning for others, to create a worthy legacy for myself? Well, next week, we will continue our journey looking at individuals who navigated well, in my opinion, the worlds of Caesar and God.